This is the render for the new Washington Dulles. The price tag? $22 billion. That's more than America spent rebuilding all of John F. Kennedy International for an airport that handles less than half the passengers and doesn't even crack the country's top 20. And the machines that made Dulles unlike any airport on Earth, the ones it has used to move passengers since 1962, are being scrapped entirely. Here's what every headline missed. This isn't America fixing a broken airport. It's spending that much to escape the airport it built on purpose to be the future. So why this airport? Why so much? And why tear out the one thing that made it famous? To understand a bill this big, you have to see what they built here, because the ambition was extraordinary, and it's the only way the rest of this makes sense. The site was chosen at the presidential level. In 1958, President Eisenhower personally selected a location in Virginia, acquiring nearly 10,000 acres at $500 per acre, with no public hearings and no community input. The land was not empty. The community of Willard, a largely African-American settlement established after the Civil War, with homes, farms, churches and schools, was erased to make way for the runways. Over 300 structures were demolished. What sits under the terminal now is what used to be Willard. For the architect, the government chose Eero Saarinen, the designer of the Gateway Arch and the TWA Flight Center at JFK. He died of a brain tumor in 1961 at 51 and never saw it open. Dulles was dedicated by President Kennedy in November 1962 as the first commercial airport in America designed specifically for jet aircraft, not retrofitted for jets like everything before it, but built from scratch, knowing what jets needed. And Saarinen built it to be seen. A catenary cable roof, precast concrete panels slung between outward-sloping piers that he described as a huge continuous hammock suspended between concrete trees. A building that, from across the road, looks caught mid-flight. The land behind it was deliberately oversized for a future of mass jet travel. Newark had no room, LAX had no room. Dulles was built with room to spare because the people who designed it believed the future would fill it. Then there was the piece nobody else had tried, the mobile lounges. When Dulles opened, jet bridges barely existed. Passengers still walked onto open tarmac to reach their planes. Saarinen's answer was a room-sized vehicle that drove out to meet the aircraft wherever it parked and lifted hydraulically to dock with the door. You walked 200 feet from the terminal into a lounge and were driven straight to your plane without stepping outside. The lounge itself was the gate. It was genuinely revolutionary. The Concorde landed here. The Space Shuttle Discovery was delivered here. For a moment, in 1962, Dulles looked exactly like what it was supposed to be, the airport of the future. So, what went wrong? The mobile lounges made sense when planes parked on open tarmac and passengers boarded from outside. But by the 1970s and 80s, the industry standardized on jet bridges, and the lounge that had been a luxury became a liability. You feel it most on an international arrival. A long flight lands, the plane parks at a remote stand, and passengers file onto a PlaneMate, a vehicle like the mobile lounge that drives them to a bay to transfer into the terminal. The wait in that bay while it fills to capacity can stretch to 20 minutes after an 8-hour flight from Europe. The same machine that had been a symbol of the future, a completely different feeling. By the mid-1980s, Dulles needed more gates than the lounges could serve, and the fix became the most telling detail in the airport's history. In 1985, a midfield concourse went up. Corrugated metal siding, low ceilings, no natural light, a kilometre of narrow corridor. It was explicitly described at the time as temporary, a stopgap, always meant to be replaced. That temporary concourse, Concourse CD, is still standing today. It stood for 41 years. It may be the longest-standing temporary concourse at any major US airport. Nothing is more permanent than a temporary fix that works just well enough that nobody replaces it. Even the fix that came had a flaw. The Aero train opened in 2010, a $1.5 billion underground rail line connecting the terminal to concourses A, B and C. But its Concourse C station was built for a permanent concourse that was never built, so passengers had to walk back to the one that actually existed. Concourse D got no station at all, so the airport built to feel effortless became one of the most confusing in the country to move through. The mobile lounges kept running 630 trips a day because the system meant to replace them never reached where they were actually needed. The airport built to be the gateway to America's future had become the one everyone complained about, and nobody would spend the money to fix. Until now. In 2026, the money finally arrived. Here's what it's buying. The Saarinen terminal is preserved. It's eligible for the National Register, a status confirmed in 1978 and expanded 300 feet in each direction. The catenary roof, the slanted columns, the hammock, those stay. But the renders released with the plan show the new glass and steel expansion rising around the old shell until the icon looks almost swallowed by it, the frame closing over the painting. Everything behind it changes. 4 new linear concourses replace the existing A, B, C and D. The 1985 temporary concourse, the one that was never supposed to last the decade, is finally slated to come down more than 40 years after it opened as a stopgap. More than 5 million square feet of new and renovated space is added. A new parking structure, roughly 32,000 spaces, which the plan bills as potentially the largest in the world, anchors the landside. The Aero train is extended underground in a U-shaped loop that reaches Concourse D for the first time, and international arrivals will walk directly to customs instead of waiting on a vehicle on the tarmac. And the mobile lounges are retired. The one machine no other major airport ever copied is the thing being scrapped to make Dulles normal. They will have run for 64 years, still working right up to the end, still doing what Saarinen designed them to do. Whether the last one ends up in a museum or a scrapyard hasn't been decided. On paper, it's everything Dulles has needed for decades. The modernization nobody would fund finally funded. There's just one problem. The bill. Go back to that number, $22 billion. Here's the context no render shows you. To see what that kind of money should buy, look at what New York is getting for less. JFK's $19 billion isn't a renovation, it's a teardown. The Port Authority is raising 5 aging terminals and replacing them with 2 enormous new ones, including a $9.5 billion international terminal, 2.4 million square feet, built to be the country's premier global gateway, and a $4.2 billion terminal beside it. And almost none of it is public money. Roughly $15 billion of the $19 billion comes from private partners who front the cash to build the terminals in exchange for running them for decades. All of it poured into the busiest international airport in the United States, one already handling more than 62 million passengers a year, more than double what Dulles sees. Now put Dulles beside it. For $22 billion, $3 billion more than all of JFK, and roughly 3 times what New York spent rebuilding LaGuardia, Dulles isn't building 2 new megaterminals from the ground up. It's keeping its original terminal, expanding it, and rebuilding the concourses behind it. That's a genuine, overdue modernization, but it's a facelift and an add-on next to JFK's ground-up reinvention. And it's paid for the opposite way. Where JFK leaned on private capital, Dulles leans on public debt. One airport is spending mostly private money to rebuild the nation's #1 international gateway. The other is spending more, public-backed, to modernize an airport that ranks around 24th, betting the passengers show up to justify it. Both are gambles on growth, but Dulles is asking a far smaller crowd to carry a bigger bill. Per passenger, that gap is stark. JFK's rebuild works out to a few $100s for every traveller who uses it. Dulles comes to more than double that. And it doesn't vanish, it lands on the people who fly there. The project is financed through MWAA municipal bonds, tax-exempt debt repaid through the fees airlines pay for every departing passenger. That fee, the cost per enplanement, was $9.56 in 2025. A May 2026 airline briefing projected it could reach $90.64 by 2035 if the work is financed entirely through those bonds. A roughly 850% jump, first surfaced by aviation finance writer Gary Leff. One analyst called that number astronomical, and noted United already complains about Newark at $27. Another flatly predicts the plan is too expensive to happen as announced and will blow past that once the overruns arrive. And then there's the question of who gets to remake it. When the Trump administration asked for proposals in December 2025, 31 came in and one stood apart. BlackRock, the world's largest asset manager, offered to finance the whole thing, build it, and then operate Dulles outright, taking the revenues from NWAA in what would have been the first privatization of a federally leased airport in American history. United, which carries roughly 2/3 of Dulles' passengers, moved to block it because a third-party operator would control the fees United ultimately repays. The administration chose the bond structure instead. Wall Street tried to take over the capital's airport. The airline that runs it blocked the deal. The president also floated renaming the airport. That's in the public record. But here's the honest counterweight, because the critics might be wrong. Dulles isn't being built for today's numbers. Its master plan targets 90 million passengers a year, late this century, more than 3 times today's traffic. Spread across that, the cost per passenger looks ordinary. United's CEO makes exactly this argument. The alarming fee assumes the passengers don't grow, and he's betting they will. So the whole bet rests on a single wager. Will the passengers actually come? Here's what this video won't do. Tell you whether this is good or bad. That's the wrong answer to the right question. What's happening at Dulles isn't a broken airport being fixed. It's one vision of the future being traded for another. The 1962 vision was radical and genuine. Saarinen actually believed the mobile lounge beat the jet bridge, and at the time, the evidence agreed with him. It only became a liability when the rest of the world went another way and Dulles didn't. The 2026 vision is the opposite. Conventional, proven, the template every major hub already uses. It will work, and it will be faster. Those are real improvements. But the 1962 airport was built for a future nobody had imagined yet. The 2026 one is built to catch up to the present. Saarinen's bet lasted 64 years before the money came to replace it. The question worth leaving open is whether this one ages half as well. Whether it's the airport of the future, or a $22 billion bet on 90 million passengers who might never come. That record year everyone points to, 29 million passengers, is barely a third of what the rebuild is chasing. The gap between what exists and what's promised is real. Whether it closes that gap or just buys the next generation a problem they'll need $40 billion to escape is genuinely unknowable right now. Did you ride the mobile lounges? What's your Dulles story? And would you have spent it? Drop it in the comments. Subscribe for more mega build stories. Thanks for watching.